We will now call the November 4th, 2024 board meeting to order. Ms. Harrison, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Representing Educational District 1, Ms. Katie Howard.
Present.
Representing Educational District 2, Ms. Aretta Bowden.
Present.
Representing Educational District 3, Dr. Ken Zeff. Representing Educational District 4 and Vice Chair, Ms. Jennifer McDonald.
Promotion day. Here.
Representing Educational District 5 and Board Chair, Ms. Erica Mitchell.
Present.
Representing Educational District 6, Ms. Ishay Collins. She will be joining us on Zoom shortly. Representing Educational District at Large Seat 7, Mr. Alfred Shivy Brooks.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large Seat 8, Ms. Cynthia Briscoe Brown.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large Seat 9, Ms. Jessica Johnson.
Present.
I would also like to make everyone aware we have Madam General Counsel Nita Gupta present, as well as our Superintendent, Dr. Brian Johnson, present. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Now we entertain a motion to approve October 7, 2024 meeting minutes.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, seconded by Vice Chair McDonald. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Any opposed? Well, I'm sorry, any opposed, motion carried. I know what I was talking about. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve November 4th, 2024 board meeting agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, second by Board Member Brooks. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Johnson. What day are we in within your 100 days? Do we have a count? Last board meeting was 46 days. We got a count?
I don't know.
You stop counting.
300, 400.
All is good. Yeah. Well, with that being said, would you bring forth the work session items for today's meeting?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Today we have 3 presentations. One, a board-requested presentation around student services and employee wellness that our Superintendent of Student Services, Chelsea Montgomery, will bring forth. Secondly, a presentation on the monthly financial update that Dr. Lisa Bracken will bring. And then thirdly is our student outcome-focused governance presentation, which is around Goal 2, and interim Goal 2.1 and 2.2. So we are ready now for Ms. Montgomery to come forth and give us an update on student services and wraparound services. I will share, and I know she will go into this, that we've tried to include a good bit of data within this presentation. Obviously, I know there will be good energy and conversation around the data, but as you look at the data, what I also want to make sure, and I'm sure she does as well, is that we talk about the strategies and what we're trying to do, what she's trying to do in her area to support these areas. But as we, and it's been our commitment as we've started to really lean into the data. So I appreciate Chelsea and Eric and the entire team putting together this data. So, Chelsea.
All right, good afternoon, Board Chair Mitchell, Vice Chair McDonald, board members, and Dr. Johnson. I'm Chelsea Montgomery, and I'm here to present an update on the Department of Student Services and our progress within Atlanta Public Schools. Thank you for requesting this presentation and allowing me the opportunity to continue to spread the word about the services and supports we have here in APS. This presentation includes high-level data, but is focused on the work that's taking place. Let's dive into the initiatives, partnerships, and ongoing support we're building for our students and families. The presentation is divided into 4 parts: the locations of the work itself, the work, the people, and then last but certainly not least, our partners. Our team provides support and services and wraparound supports through the APS Student and Family Support Hub. This centralized location offers resources like student registration, records management, and discipline hearings, making it easy for families to access critical services. We're adding more and more supports and services every day. Additionally, local organizations can reserve space at the hub to support our students and families directly. We're also excited to announce construction of the Gooder grocery store, which will soon allow accessible food options for our school community. So the road to the hub, it's been a long one with a lot of your support. Our journey to creating the hub began with a vision in August of 2023. Recognizing the need for improved services, we transform our facilities to better meet the needs of our students and families. Over the past year, we've engaged stakeholders, completed a full renovation, and hosted open houses to introduce the hub to the community. The hub is now fully operational, and we welcome ongoing engagement with individuals and organizations interested in supporting our students. We're actively encouraging the community to get involved with our programs, events, and services. We welcome volunteers, both during regular operations and for our future store. Donations can be made via our Amazon wish list, and items can be dropped off daily. The categories we're really looking for is household cleaning, personal hygiene, and clothing. For those looking to schedule events, School Dues offers a streamlined way to reserve the hub for various services and programs. We've already scheduled quite a few. The hub happenings, and for our digital side of the hub, please visit us at the APS Hub on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Now we'll move on to how we organize our work. We implement a multi-tiered system of support to address the diverse needs of our students. Through 3 tiers, we provide core academic and behavioral supports to all kids, targeted interventions for approximately the 20%, and individualized support for the approximately 5% that need it. This model emphasizes prevention, aiming to proactively address challenges before they escalate. We specifically look at this tiered approach for academics, behavior, attendance, and mental health. Let's start with discussing discipline. This is a screenshot sample of what will soon be available to the public to increase transparency in APS. This is a snapshot of our discipline and behavior summary. It is important to point out that year over year, last year, we decreased out-of-school suspensions by 2,372 days, or 5.6%. Now let's look at our year-to-date discipline. This was about a week ago, full disclosure, when we originally made this deck. So you'll see on this slide, out-of-school suspension. On the left side, you have enrollment by type, so you can make that comparison, and then elementary school out-of-school suspension by school type. So you can see traditional schools, charter schools, and partner schools, the number of OSS days, and the grade levels. Next is the middle school data. You have enrollment by school type compared to the OSS by school type and grade level of traditional charter and partner schools. And then finally, high school. You'll notice in all of the discipline data as well as the attendance data, we see spikes in 9th grade. What that really is it's not true 9th graders. When you start to mess with cohort filters, you can see our students that are overage and undercredited are struggling with attendance, they're struggling with discipline, they're struggling across the board. So you'll see that kind of reflected in all the data. So that 9th grade spike you see is actually not true 9th graders. I think it's important too, for anyone that isn't aware of this, that may not be attached to the state of Georgia. In the state of Georgia, you progress through the grades based on your credits. So you're not a 10th grader automatically because it's your second year in high school. So those overage, undercredited 9th graders account for the majority of that spike across the board in data, in our areas at least. Next, I try to get a good, concise way to look at subgroup data. So on the left side, you have your breakdown percentage of OSS days by race, and then on the right side, you have by subgroup. So you have, yes, they are a member of that subgroup, no, they are not, and there is a small group of students in the economically disadvantaged category. We're just not sure if they are or aren't. So this is OSS subgroup data. And then ISS subgroup data. I also think it's notable to mention on this slide that every school does not have ISS. We can't say that's what contributes to this necessarily, but I do think it's worth mentioning. So I want to be very careful to put a delineation between discipline and behavior work. Good behavior work keeps discipline from occurring. So good behavior work is preventative, and good behavior work can impact discipline, but we do treat them very separately. So we look at this at what we do at Tier 1, what we do at Tier 2, and what we do at Tier 3. So we do use that tiered approach. At Tier 1, we focus on those proactive measures, such as positive behavioral interventions and supports. We currently have 17 schools with a designation from the Georgia DOE for doing that work. That's a positive designation. We do restorative practices work, and then we offer classroom management training. For students needing more intensive support, we offer Tier 2 small group programming, and then individualized Tier 3 intervention plans, and we're very fortunate in APS to have 2 general education board certified behavior analysts that help us out with those individualized Tier 3 plans. I want to mention on this slide, the state is combining MTSS and PBIS. We already started that work last year, combining those 2 things. So we're very, very excited about the direction the state is going, and we look forward to see how that alignment folds into the alignment that we've already established. Changing to attendance. So this data shows attendance risk level by grade and by school type. Please note the darkest shade of blue is chronically absent. That's students that have missed 10% or more of their enrolled days. So these are traditional schools, followed by charter schools, followed by partner schools. We do want to note that in APS, year over year, last year, we did reduce chronic absenteeism by 1.9%, which is 1,198 students. So attendance will remain a key focus. We engage in year-round attendance awareness campaigns, utilizing personalized interventions to address chronic absenteeism. Our Everyday Intervention program sends personalized letters and text reminders to students at risk of poor attendance. To date, we've sent 17,080 mailed attendance letters and 41,880 text messages. That's so far this year. We've received 10,556 responses to those text messages. The top 3 resource requests are for the attendance, as my child really missed that many days, which is the reason we do that, to raise that awareness. Asking for community resources, transportation, the school calendar. And then the top 3 resource clicks from those automated texts are the parent portal login, the calendar, and then academic resources. The school social workers provide further support at Tier 3, and they specifically case manage those students that are struggling with chronic absenteeism. And we have a collaboration with programs like the SEEDS program with the Solicitor General's office to specifically address ed neglect. That's the first time in the almost 10 years I've been in Metro Atlanta that I've seen really specific ed neglect work, so we really appreciate him for that program. Mental health. We're committed to supporting mental health across schools. Each campus has a mental health provider, and some have their own on-site clinical therapists. We use tools like Say Something Anonymous Reporting System and the Securely platform to identify students needing mental health support. In addition, our STARS support offers assistance to any school experiencing a crisis and ensuring comprehensive mental health support across APS. We currently have 6 different mental health providers in our schools. Every school has a provider on campus. The numbers will continue to increase as the year goes along, and we heavily encourage schools, parents, guardians to work with their providers to have small groups, parent nights, etc. I can't encourage small groups enough. Oftentimes parents are concerned about their child receiving that therapy specifically at school, but what we do see is when they're part of a small group, when the group is over, then the parents are like, well, wait a minute, we want them to continue to see that person. So that's, we do see the turnover from that. I also need to give a shout out to Pathways. All of the toughest schools to support because of private insurance reasons and just the way things work in Georgia are our highest socioeconomic schools. Pathways stepped in and volunteered to pick up the entire North Atlanta cluster this year. So I have to give them a lot of credit for that because that's not easy work to do. So next, I would like to highlight our dedicated student services staff. The departments that fall under student services are the Office of Student Discipline, School Counseling, Psychological Services, School Social Work, the Multi-Tiered System of Support Department, and the Health Services Department. We could not do this alone, though, so I have a shout out in there to our key collaborators. That's the Department of Student Records and Student Assignment, Family Engagement, Partnerships, the Atlanta Partner for Education, Social Emotional Learning Department, and then, of course, the Exceptional Education Department. We work very, very closely with those departments and others every day. So student services staffing levels. So you have the positions on the left, school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, and school nurses. Next, we have those APS ratios, 1 to 328, 1 to 521, 1 to 927, and then 1 to 537. You have those national recommended ratios in the middle, and then I do think there is some key other relevant information in there, specifically about school counselors, school social workers. That commitment to have at least one full-time school social worker came in 2022, 2023. That's a very unique Metro commitment. That is something to be very, very proud of here in APS. And school psychologists, Board Member Brooks, I appreciated the question. We are 100% fully staffed for school psychologists. That is no joke. So shout out to our HR team, shout out to our Director of Psychological Services for not only recruiting but retaining that staff. To have 54 school psychologists on staff is no easy task. And then APS has committed to 1.0 school nurse per school. That is also an APS shout out as well. All of the metro districts do not have a school nurse in every school. Some districts do, but some don't. So that is also a commitment that APS has made that we should be very proud of. I do think it's important to discuss when we're thinking of all of this work, the staff members that exist at a school. So for example, a school may only have 2 school counselors, but they might have a behavior specialist and a graduation coach. I think it's important to look at those comprehensive teams. And Board Member Johnson, we are working on specifically at the high school level, what does each high school have so we can see their whole team? It's just taking a minute to do it. But this is how many behavior specialists we have, graduation coaches, EIP teachers, which are those elementary intervention teachers that we get funded partially by the state. Same with remedial teachers, that's 612 teachers that are partially funded by the state. A couple schools have college advisors. We have seen an increase in the specialist SST intervention position. That is someone that full-time works on the MTSS work. Some schools, they also have 504s and other work as well. And then we do have 6 schools that have clinical therapists. They're actually full-time staff members. Next are our key partners and vendors. Collaboration remains central to our mission. Our partnerships span various sectors, including Achieve Atlanta for college readiness, communities and schools for academic and personal well-being support, Big Brothers Big Sisters for mentorship, and together these partners allow us to address students' needs holistically, providing resources beyond the classroom. At the end of the presentation in the appendix, it actually says specifically which schools have each one of these programs. And the REACH program is new this year. That's supported by DA Willis's office. And then we also included 100 Black men. They have about 100 mentors across APS. Our partners amplify our impact. Vision to Learn and Lions Lighthouse has provided vision screenings, exams, and glasses for hundreds of students, while the Atlanta Community Food Bank and Gooder ensure food security across our schools. We're very grateful for partners like Atlanta Housing, which further support the diverse needs of our students and families. We want to give a shout out to APS Cares. If you have never tried this website before, I cannot encourage you to try it enough. This is a great personalized way. You can actually just type in your zip code and it will give you all of your local resources. So we don't need to maintain those guides and make sure the phone numbers are up to date and the hours of operations are up to date. Everything is up to date on this website. You can find more things that Atlanta has to offer than you ever thought possible. So thank you for your support and listening to this presentation today. We're excited about the future of student services within APS and look forward to continued progress. If you'd like to learn more or get involved, please visit us at the Hub in person or connect with us on social media. Together, we can make a significant impact on our students' lives. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Always appreciate your great energy that you bring to these conversations. I'll start down here. Question? Yes? I mean, I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying if you, okay. Anyone else on this side? Okay, yes, okay. Katie, go ahead. So just everyone. Okay, got it.
Thank you so much for all the work you're doing and have been doing, and for the transparency. It's critically important, we know. On slide 21, looking at school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, school nurse, thank you for highlighting the importance of all these different positions, and also the restorative practices coaches, all the people that are involved in supporting our students. And we're fortunate to have those people. And about the school counselors, is this for all schools, charters, and partners, or just traditional, this number?
Just traditional. The only one that includes charters and partners is the school psychologist because we directly serve them out of that pot. That's why there's a little asterisk over there. So this is strictly traditionals.
Perfect. So, and knowing that it's different depending upon the population of the school, and you highlight that as well, with 17 schools above the state recommended ratio. And also appreciate you pointing out, I know for counselors, you know, but for all the different positions like graduation coaches that high schools have put in place, you're still unpacking that. So autonomy is great, but it also means that things can ebb and flow, which should be the case. The principals are looking at what their needs are with their go teams. But looking at strategy going forward, is there anything you are honing in group and looking at what would be ideal, maybe, and give me like elementary or middle for school counselors in a ratio, or high school? Clearly, we're looking at planning for the budget and just thinking about these things. You know, share a little about the strategy right now and that this area in particular.
So I think it, nope. Is it working? There we go. So I think it does depend on the school, but there's still work that has to get done. So I think that's where we need to do a good job of saying, these are the pockets of work to get done. You may have different people doing it at your school. For example, at one school, a school counselor may provide a lot of behavioral and behavior plan and classroom management support. At another school, that may not be their strong suit at all. We need to make sure there's someone on the ground at that school that's really invested in classroom management coaching. So for us, it's about defining the work, and then at this point, allowing the schools the flexibility for who they assign to that work and making sure they get supported.
That's extremely helpful. And then knowing that you're going to be looking at that data as to who is having the most impact, how those roles are used. So I know me and my colleagues will be looking forward to that data, especially as we further develop the budget. Like, how are we going to best support this area for students? Thank you.
Yeah, and the more each one of these staff members carry caseloads, the easier it is to measure those specific student outcomes. That's true for our partners as well. The more they carry those specific caseloads, we've never really held them to those student outcomes either. So we need to do that across the board, not only internally, but with our partners as well.
Dr. Z?
Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. And this presentation just shows how much are we putting at our schoolhouse, at our schoolhouses, where our schools are into feeding kids, into vision, into mental health, all of these other services that we are the epicenter of a community. I want to really talk about attendance, because attendance is the 5-alarm fire to me.
Yep.
According to GOSA, we're at 35% chronic absenteeism, which is about 5 points higher than Clayton and DeKalb, and even more even larger compared to the other districts in Metro Atlanta. I know you talked about your tier 1, tier 2 around texting and messages, but obviously it's not getting through. And a 1.5% increase is better. But and I think about all the investments that we're making in our in our teacher professional development and in supporting our staff. If we don't get kids into the building, then we're missing that opportunity. I know for elementary kids, it's more of a parental issue, and secondary maybe more kids. But what do you need from us? As tying this to the presentation we're about to hear from Dr. Bracken about the budget, this to me is we got to make progress, and we seem to be really far behind our partners in this space. And I know our ecosystem is different, and I know we have a different set of challenges, but what do you need from us? Is it more social workers? Is it more case planning? Is it more partnerships with nonprofits? To me, this is, we need to make sure we have a plan going into next year.
So I think a couple of things. One, the messaging is new, and I can tell you the amount of phone calls we receive saying, there's no way my child's missed 6 days so far. There really genuinely wasn't an awareness. And I say to staff, how many days of work have you missed in the last 3 months? A lot of people don't really know. So that awareness, I think, is really step one, that like, no, really, like those days add up. Absences are absences, even if they're excused. Really shifting that mindset away from truancy, punitive, huge problems to just chronic absenteeism, excused or not. Here's how many days. And as a parent, you can make that decision and that's okay, but we want to make sure everybody knows really where absences stand. That's the first thing we're really noticing this year, is that genuinely, I don't think everyone knew how much and how quickly those add up. As far as, so I appreciate the support in making parents aware of how that's adding up. Housing is our number one problem. Getting our families in stable housing, I can't even express how many phone calls a day even I get begging for stable housing. As far as the needs compared to even food, clothes, mental health, housing is a significant challenge. We have a lot of families with vouchers that with nowhere to use them. We can get them vouchers, but they don't have anywhere that will take them. It's massively impactful to our families, and there isn't a whole lot we can do, which is kind of frustrating, beyond frustrating. I think we do an okay job with providing basic level supports. It's those higher level, more intense, just socioeconomic challenges that our parents are experiencing. I do think we have more kids that need to lean into their mental health providers at their schools. For those services, those numbers could definitely increase. I think we have a lot of what we need. We need to improve our warm and welcoming environment. We're trying to do that and repair with some trust at the hub, but I think at our schools too. That combination, PBIS, MTSS, I hope will help. I think we should encourage more schools to be doing PBIS. And just really, this is the place to be. We want you here, welcome here. Those soft touches from teachers. We just, everybody's got to own attendance. Social work can't just own attendance alone.
Thank you. And Dr. Johnson, I just encourage, as we move into the budget conversation, this is, we are vastly underperforming the region, and I take Ms. Montgomery's points about housing, et cetera, but if there are investments that this board can make, I look forward to hearing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Shivi?
Yes, thank you so much to my colleagues for those questions. You guys leaned in on a few things that I was pondering about. Dr. Montgomery, thank you so much for your presentation and for drilling down on so many things. I guess first I want to commend the work that everyone has done in decreasing the overall amount of out-of-school suspensions. 5.6%, I believe is what I heard.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So I definitely want to take a moment to acknowledge that, because that's intentional work. I am curious, speaking on the attendance point, how much of an impact is transportation or lack thereof having on our secondary kids, and do we have any way to quantify that? And I'm thinking specifically the student who maybe misses their school bus, but there's no late bus for them. How many occurrences is that representing in the overall amount? The other question I have around attendance is looking at our charter school secondary data in comparison to our traditional secondary data, and I believe it was pages 12 and 13. Drastic differences in chronic absenteeism rates between the two. If you flip between the two, it's like the dark blue percentage of the candlesticks is just way different. I'm curious if there is a reason behind that. Is there some automatic enrollment that's happening that is kind of limiting the percentage of chronic absenteeism, or are there things happening at our charter schools that we can be replicating at our traditional schools that we should really be taking note of and being intentional about. The last thing, the other question that I had was around the school psychologist. I appreciate that. I heard we're fully staffed, but when we look at the larger canon, we are almost 2x the ratio of what the state recommends. And so I'm wondering if we consider ourselves to be fully staffed, and I don't know if this is a Ms. Lawson question or a Dr. Johnson question, but should we be putting more investment and opening up more opportunities to bring in more school psychologists? I recently visited Slater Elementary, and what I've heard is one of their big challenges with getting their IEPs done is, 45-day, 60-day wait sometimes to get a school psychologist, and that's with us saying that we're fully staffed.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things. I was actually very curious too about the charter, specifically the secondary attendance. I played around with some filters to see if I could see anything obvious, and I didn't. But I'm going to follow up with Matt Underwood specifically and just kind of see, is there something we're missing, because they're doing very well with attendance. So to that, and then with the school psychologists, I'm just going to be very honest. A huge challenge with the school psychologists is so many schools. The ratios look good, but when you're trying to cover buildings of 200-300 kids, they're spread out building wise. That's for sure a challenge. They just that movement of constantly trying to cover 4 schools, which if the schools were 800 kids, they would only be covering 2 schools. You can really see those challenges of the number of buildings with the school psychologists and just trying to get scheduled and be on site. We only have a couple schools that have their own full-time, the bigger high schools. So that's not doing them any favors.
Right, but given that our ratio is like 2x the state ratio, if we 2x the amount of psychologists that we had, they wouldn't be doing 4 schools, they'd be doing 2 schools.
Yeah, I think when you look at just the raw numbers, there's not it's probably a little bit less of a building issue and more of a personnel to number of individuals issue. And so I think there'll definitely be opportunity. The budget's going to be a series of decisions. I'll go back and speak to something earlier that Board Member Zeff said around attendance. I think the biggest thing the board can do is to encourage in the community, and we'll do the same and have been doing the same. Come to school. We need students to come to school. And we know there's various and sundry challenges that exist, but come to school. It positions you for everything else you're trying. If you're there, if you're present, that in and of itself begins the learning journey. And so come to school. And then I think to the psychologist point, I think as we get in the budget cycle even deeper and are able to make more decisions, obviously one of the things that the beauty of data is it tells you exactly where you are. And when we look at the 1 to 900 and whatever the ratio is, we know that ratio is a good bit out of kilter. Now, I will say there are positives, and again, coming from a couple different places, there are real positives in areas of investment that I see within APS. When I look at the counselor to student ratio, even though it's not at the national average of 1 to 250, most places aren't even close to it. And so APS is extremely close to it. And then I think the other thing that probably should be taken into account are some of the other partnerships that are there. Mm-hmm. And so how do those partnerships with external supports help to offset some of this, such that we may not necessarily need to fund in the traditional way a full-time counselor. So I think if you kind of triangulate it and you look at and I think Board Member Howard asked for this in a conversation last week. It'd be a little too messy to pull together, but I think once you lay over like the counselor, psychologist, social worker, and community support and community resource piece, it might be that we're getting some of that psychologist level support or third-party support from an external standpoint that helps to offset it. I don't know what that math problem looks like, but that's something that we could chase down going forward.
Yeah, and I think too, like, we can do some intentional training. Like, the Communities and Schools organization is very open to, let's do youth mental health first aid training for all of your mentors. Like, I think there are opportunities to bulk up the supports without necessarily changing the ratios. One thing that definitely throws off the school psychologists too is because they are the only group on there that also support charter and partner schools. No one else does on that chart.
Yeah, and last thing I wanted to add too is, I am encouraged in knowing the conversations that we're having as a board, specifically around our surplus properties, and looking at our challenges around housing for our families. I am encouraged to be a part of a board that seems to have an appetite to be intentional about what we do with those properties and how we can have impact around affordable housing, not only for the employees of the district and the city, but also for our families. And I really see that as an opportunity for us to really lean in. It may not be, a fix for tomorrow or next month, but these problems aren't going anywhere. And I think long term, I encourage us to kind of keep our ear on this point when we look at how to be intentional with those surplus properties. So thank you for elevating that.
Thanks. Cynthia?
Yeah, can we go back to, let me see what slide it is, 11. It's the one, yeah.
Right there.
Right there, with the pie chart and the bar chart. I'd like to go a little deeper into this one because I want to make sure that I understand what this is trying to represent. The pie chart first is that the number of students who get OSS or the number of days that students, in other words, are we saying here in this pie chart that 93%, 93.5% of OSS days are served by Black students?
Exactly, yes, it's days.
It's days, it's not students.
Yes, ma'am.
So it is a much smaller number of students, presumably, because it's, one student is probably serving more than one day.
Unfortunately, there are some that, yes, have 10 plus days.
Yeah, typically, a student would serve more than one day of OSS. Also,
Yes.
my guess, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the students who serve OSS are a relatively small subset of the total student population.
Correct, yes.
So a few students are serving all the days, basically.
Yes,
Okay.
I don't want to be wrong, but it's somewhere in the 90% of students have no SS days whatsoever. I don't remember if it was 92 or 96. I can go back and look it up for you for certain. Have no OSS days whatsoever.
Okay, so we're talking about, so the entire pie, well, no, we don't know how many students that represents. I guess we do, because if about 90% of our students serve no SS days, then they're all served by about 5,000 of our roughly 50,000
Yes.
students. And I'm
Yes.
using very,
That's a
very
fair
round-
assumption, yes.
very round
Yes.
numbers here. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm under or over-representing anything. I just can't do numbers down to the ones
Yes,
for
ma'am.
what we're talking about here. Okay, so that universe is about 5,000 students.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then over on the right, we are trying to represent, I'm not sure, can you tell me?
Yeah, so this is just high-level kind of yes/no data. This is not to show disproportionality. So that's just a high level of.
That's what I needed to hear.
Yes.
This is not to show disproportionality.
Correct.
Because I thought this slide was trying to indicate disproportionality.
I would need to give you double bar graphs with the proportions of each of those groups in order to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a point of clarity, though, is there is still a disproportionate amount of Black students that are suspended. I think to
Correct.
the point, recidivism or the return, the rate is something to lean into. And I know schools are leaning into that, but you're talking about, like, still the majority of our, if this data were to correlate and line up with district data, the numbers would be in the 70-ish%, right, for Black students. So there's still a disproportionate amount, but it's not that 93.5% of black students are suspended. It is, and I think to the point, something we don't necessarily celebrate that is an absolute positive. We were doing this when we were looking into the data, is that, it is only about 10% of students that are, have been suspended out of school. But we've got some real work to do when you look at what that 10% is, and so you can do the math problem and back into what that is. But there's still a disproportionate amount of black students that are suspended here, and so that's just the numbers, right? That's just pure numbers.
But that is not what this slide was designed to tell us. That's the point I was trying to make. So my next question is, do we have any data on disproportionality?
And before we get to that, just one nuance. It's roughly 10% of our students who have any disciplinary infractions at all. It's even short of suspension in school or out of school. 90% of our students don't have any disciplinary infraction.
And so some smaller subset of that 10% are represented by the OSS
Yes, ma'am.
information. Okay.
Yes, we do have all of that disproportionality data. When I put it on here, it was just a lot. But ultimately, what it can look like, and it would be easy for me to do, is like on the unhoused bar, to then below that put the proportion of unhoused to housed in APS. I could put each of those right below, and I'd be happy to make that slide quickly.
I'd be interested
Sure.
in seeing that kind of data. I do think we need to focus on those disproportionalities, and particularly in our conversations around housing being such a challenge related to discipline, unless we understand how many of our students that actually affects, it's hard to do anything about it.
Yes, ma'am. And you can, especially on that economically disadvantaged, the number of students that are, yes, of the whole proportion of OSS days is significant.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Jessica?
Thank you. So I am looking at slide, this is not touchscreen, 7. Slide 7, and one of the data points that kind of struck me is the incidence by grade. And so if we're looking at the kindergarten through even just 3rd or 4th grade, that's almost 600 incidents in those grade levels. Is that correct?
Yes, now that doesn't mean that resulted in any type of discipline or suspensions or anything, though. That's just recorded incidents.
Sure, but there was another slide that talked about, I guess, the number of suspensions in those early grade
Yes.
levels. The next one, yes. So slide 8, kind of talks about the number of suspensions. One of the things that I noticed is that when on the key partners and vendors in the appendix, there weren't a lot of those partners that had elementary school supports listed, and I'm wondering if there's opportunities there for us to explore ways to make sure that from the behavior standpoint and absenteeism as well, there's opportunities to engage some of those partners on the elementary school level. And I would say to my board colleagues, it would seem like those on the policy committee, maybe this is something that we might want to consider looking into from a policy perspective going forward, and just want to lift that up. And then my question was around the partnerships that are listed. Thank you for showing by school. I think that's probably my first time seeing who's serving where, and that is a big question. You're trying to figure out, is everyone receiving a level of supports outside of the traditional school structure and network? Do you have any information, either anecdotally or data-wise, that you can share about how we're measuring the impact of those partnerships on absenteeism and behavior across our schools?
So I'm very glad you brought that up. We are actually really looking to move some of those partnerships to something called outcomes-based contracts. So rather than pay for service, we pay for student outcomes. And even though some of those partners are paid by other entities, other private organizations, I think it is powerful to go into a room with X Foundation and say, hey, don't give us your check yet. We're going to pay for these outcomes. Can y'all give it to us then? So also getting our partners and foundation partners, donors, looped into those conversations. But yes, we are very much looking to move partnerships in a direction of vendors and outcomes-based payment and service.
That is exciting. Thank you so much.
And wrapping up with Loretta.
So thank you, everyone, for your questions and for your answers. I have 2 questions. One is have we identified, and if we have, what are we doing to find the students that we may have lost during the COVID crisis, right? So not everyone came back to school. What efforts have we done to find those children, and have they been successful? And
So I think the immediate ones right after were a little bit before my time, so I don't want to speak to that. But since then, I can speak to the students that have come back. It has been very interesting to see where students have been and what they've been engaging in that come back 2-3 grade levels off of where they left us. So placing them and really coming up with very strategic support plans for the kids that do come back, because what we don't want to happen is you come back and you are so overwhelmed that you just disappear again. So we've been very good about holding on to those kids that we do come back through our doors, but as far as the immediate looking for them efforts, I would have to get back to you on those.
so does that support happen at the district level or at the school level, or is it both?
It's a team effort. We usually, the MTSS team is where those kind of phone calls come through, and they'll come in and say, you know, X student has missed the last 2 years of school. They should be in 8th grade. We last saw them finishing 5th grade. So what are we going to do? The school comes together. We come together with them. The cluster superintendents are involved. It's a team effort to not only make the decision, but then determine those support plans. It is a lot harder for the kids that are, and heartbreaking for the kids that have missed like 9th grade and 10th grade, because we can't place you with a really good support plan. You've got to get these credits. So we've had to get creative with how we use summer school, how we use credit recovery, to just try and get them back on track, rather than placing so far off that they don't have an inch for a mistake trying to graduate on time before they age out.
So what should a family do if they find themselves in that situation, right? Where it's been a couple years, and where do they go?
Come on over to the hub.
Come on over to the
Yes.
hub. Excellent, excellent. So that should be a good starting
Absolutely.
place for them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very, very much for the update. I think we'll now transition to Ms. Bracken in our monthly financial update.
All righty. Good afternoon, Board Chair. Board Chair Mitchell's not here. Members of the board, Dr. Johnson, today I'll present 4 topics related to finance for you. First, I'll provide you with the financials for FY 2025 for all activities occurring in the months of July through September. Next, I'll present to you the first quarter report out from student activity accounts and a budget adjustment. And finally, I'll provide you with an update on the FY 26 budget development process thus far. With the next 4 slides, we will cover the FY 25 financials for the first 3 months of the fiscal year. So far, we have collected 3.76% of the total resources budgeted, with local at 1.67%, state at 12.7%, and other at 10.01%. Tax bills for Atlanta were due October 31st, so we will see a significant increase in collections for local on the October report that is next month. We're currently slightly lagging local collections, but are ahead of pace for state as compared to this point in time the previous fiscal year. And again, all of that is just due to timing. On slide 5, we see the budget to actual expenditures so far for FY 25. Spending in all functions is appropriate for this point in the fiscal year. And on slide 6, we see the current spending trend for FY 25 against the FY 24 trend. While there are some fluctuations function by function, the overall spend is on pace with and leading the previous year. This can be due to timing of large expenditures from one month to the next and greatly impacts the percentage spend against the previous year. We'll continue to monitor spend and make recommendations accordingly. Going forward, we'll include the fund balance analysis each month. Currently for FY 25, we anticipate using $74 million of fund balance, which will mean we have a fund balance reserve of about 14.22% of expenditures, or 1.7 months of operating reserves. Slide 7 shows our federal programs budget for FY25. Because these budgets operate on a different fiscal year, so they begin October 1st, the annual spend down analysis will occur later in the year. For this month, I just wanted to remind the board of some of our largest federal program grants that we'll be reporting on as we go forward, including Title I, Title II, and Title 4A, their purpose and their initial FY 2025 allocation. We have one budget adjustment for approval this evening. This is an adjustment to the special revenue fund in the amount of $1.8 million. We're requesting to use the charter special revenue fund balance for direct administrative support to charters and partner schools, included but not limited to relocation support for schools undergoing construction projects at their home sites, security site assessments for charter and partner school facilities, collaboration initiatives between charter, partner, and district-run schools, etc. This adjustment does not impact the general fund balance. Additional details can be found in Agenda Item 6.1. Agenda Item 9.4 includes detailed information reports for special revenue adjustments less than $1 million that have occurred in October. Finally, I'm presenting the first quarter student activity fund accounts. So far, the revenue collected is approximately $1.39 million and spend is around $900,000. This is typical for this point in the fiscal year. Details of this report can be found in Agenda Item 9.3. In my final section, we'll provide an update on the FY26 budget development process so far. Last week at our Budget Commission meeting, we met to discuss and draft budget parameters. The budget parameters provide guidance to the administration as we go forward with making budget prioritization decisions. Budget parameters can address both revenue and expenditures and help to provide monitoring and accountability to the budget development process. Slide 13 shows our resource parameters, which have not changed from last year, but we do plan on bringing forward some additional information and continuing the conversation around fund balance usage and guidance at our November Budget Commission meeting. We've previously discussed the 5 primary decision factors driving the FY26 budget development process, and you'll see those embedded in the draft expenditure parameters. And here we've also included the FY25 final parameters as a reference. You'll notice that the last year, the parameters were driving increased and deeper investments in specific areas of the organization, but the parameters this year will look a bit different. We know that we're starting the budget development process with a significant $100 million budget gap. Each of the parameters that we have drafted emphasize maximizing and critically analyzing existing investments prior to making any new allocations. We seek a compensation strategy for all employees that balances competitive pay with sustainability. Reductions to the central office overhead of the district, an analysis of more than $75 million of school-based programmatic investments, scrutiny to the base allocation that every school is guaranteed, and to adjust our funding formulas accordingly, to adopt a position on the homestead exemption currently on the ballot, and to align the annual budget process with the multi-year facility master planning process. At our November Budget Commission meeting, we will review these parameters one more time and align them wherever possible to the strategic plan, goals, guardrails, equity commitments, and other guiding documents. We'll also continue our conversation on the school allotments and discuss the impacts of the homestead exemption in more detail in November. That meeting is currently scheduled for November 21st. That concludes my presentation. I can take any questions you have at this time.
Great, we'll start on the other end. Jessica, Cynthia?
Can you come back to me?
I was like, you're always at the ready.
I was
catching
just trying
Cynthia off guard.
just trying to process.
I love it, okay. So nothing down here yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Anything over here? It's not a mandatory. Dr. Z?
Thank you for this, Dr. Bracken, and thanks for the Budget Commission conversation last week. So we covered a lot of this ground then. I did want to just spend a second getting clear about the parameter that you have in mind for fund balance. So fund balance is the money, but we have, in the bank, 180 million, about 14.2% of our budget. So you're gonna, when you bring back the budget, when you and Dr. Johnson bring back the budget in the spring, that will have, you're not prepared to promise, you're not prepared to say that there won't be use of fund balance in that budget. But what we would hope is that there is if we hold our breath and we get through that there is a pathway to restoring fund balance to a place where we feel we can weather the storms that inevitably come, and you'll give us guidance on what that number should be.
Yeah, that's correct. So currently, the 7.5% and 15% that's written into the parameters are just benchmarked off of internal or external policies guidance that we have written in. We will come back to discuss in the November Budget Commission some best practices, the pros and cons of using fund balance, of having high fund balance. We'll talk through what districts and how districts leverage fund balance in November. But generally, yes. And when we look at the multi-year that we presented, I think at that September Budget Commission meeting, we will, as we are building this year's budget, we'll be also looking at that multi-year. And we know how there is some relief, at least in the revenue and resource side of our budget in the upcoming years, whether that be around our pension payoffs, whether that be around TADS closing out, that will allow us to strategically restore that fund balance and get us back to a position that is where we were in the last couple of years.
Thank you. Is the TAD discussion, is that at a Budget Commission?
It will be at a Budget Commission. I think
Okay.
we currently have that scheduled for the January 16th Budget Commission. We will do a deep dive into revenue assumptions to include a review of the TADs that we're currently invested in, the time frame of those, where our money goes into those TADs, and how that works.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have that inform any policy recommendations we have for our legislative agenda, rather, for the state. Great, thank you for that.
Oh, did you?
Go ahead, go around.
No, we're done. I don't think anyone
okay.
else wants to.
Okay. Going back to slide 15. I'm sorry, wrong one. The one about resource parameters, there it is, slide 13.
Yep.
Are these our draft parameters for 26? As opposed to our, or will those be identical to the current ones for fiscal year 25?
Both. And so, currently we've pulled forward the FY 2025 resource parameters. We discussed those at the Budget Commission last week. There was a request for us to deep dive, especially into that parameter, that second bullet that's around the between 7.5% and 15%, and narrow that target if at all possible. So we'll bring back that. So it is both the final FY 25 and the draft for FY 26. And we will refine this as a draft next month.
Okay. And the only other question I have is on slide 16 on HB 581, which of course is depending on whether it passes or not. Will you have a recommendation for opt-in or opt-out?
We will discuss that at the November Budget Commission. We don't want to have a problem until we have a problem, and so we'll see how tomorrow goes.
We hope we won't have a problem.
We'll see how tomorrow goes, and then based on that, we will have a deeper dive conversation at the commission meeting. We'll have a recommendation around opt-in, opt-out, and what we will need to do under either one of those circumstances.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. That's it. Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Absolutely. I believe, Madam Vice Chair, we are ready for Soft G.
It is now time for us to engage in board goal monitoring for interim goals 2.1 and 2.2. Interim goal 2.1 identifies the percentage of students in grades 3 to 5 with a projected Georgia Milestones achievement level of proficient or above in mathematics on the District Universal Screening Assessment MAP. 2.2 identifies the percentage of students in grades 6 through 8 with a projected Georgia Milestones achievement level of proficient or above in mathematics on the District Universal Screening Assessment MAP. I would like to take some time to review the norms and expectations for the monitoring session. As Dr. Johnson takes us through the monitoring report, he will discuss the district's progress towards meeting interim goal 2.1, the percentage of students in grades 3 through 5 with a projected Georgia Milestones achievement level of proficient or above in mathematics on the district universal screening assessment will increase from 30.2% in May 2024 to 33.2% in May of 2025. In interim goal 2.2, the percentage of students in grades 6 through 8 with a projected Georgia Milestones achievement level of proficient or above in mathematics on the district universal screening assessment will increase from 23.6% in May of 24 to 26.6% in May of 25. Board member comments and questions will be focused on creating engaging dialogue with the superintendent. What are the factors that lead to current levels of achievement? Did the district make progress towards school year 2026 goals? Why or why not? What strategies and resources worked well or did not work well? What changes and adjustments need to be made? Will the district require additional resources to meet this goal? What support do you need from the board to be successful? Please hold your questions until Dr. Johnson has had a chance to walk us through the entire report. And board member comments and questions, as a reminder, should not be evaluative, be telling the superintendent what to do, suggest administrative actions, or reference any data that is not in this report. If we do stray from our norms, Board Chair Mitchell and I will remind us that our norms and expectations are consistent for a reason. We ask that you rephrase your question or comment to align with those norms and expectations. Dr. Johnson, please walk us through the report.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm going to start by providing some background and context. Last month, as you know, we reviewed the progress on our literacy goals. This month, we will focus on our numeracy goals. I'm a pretty open book, so I was starting to chuckle as I was looking at the Soft G comments around not to be evaluative or tell the superintendent what to do or suggest administrative actions or reference data that is not in this report. So I was just having a moment of chuckle because all four of those things feel like the word. I will, not from you all, but from everybody else,
yeah.
and you all too. I will update the district on this. I'm just saying. That's
We'll be
like,
good listeners.
right.
We're good
But
listeners.
that is the work, right? I will update the status of Goal 2, interim Goal 2.1, and interim Goal 2.2. Goal 2 is the percentage of students in grades 3 through 8 that are scoring proficient or above in math as measured by the Georgia Milestones. And the goal was that it would increase from 26% to Y, which is to be established in August of 2026. Interim Goal 2.1 identifies the percentage of students in grades 3 through 5 with the projected Georgia Milestones achievement level of proficient or above in mathematics on the District Universal Screener. And Goal 2.2 has the same for grades 6 through 8 on the map. Now I'd like to reference Goal 2, which is the percentage of students in grades 3 through 8 scoring proficient or above in math as measured by the Georgia Milestones assessment, when we said it will increase from 26% in August of 2022 to the established target, to be identified target in August of 2026. Currently, the district is below target. So if you go to the next slide, I would like to call your attention to the legend. The blue line included in the figure shows our target line. The purple line shows the pre-baseline, and the orange line shows our actual current level of progress. The letter N shows us the number of students scoring proficient or above in the Georgia Milestones math assessment. This is the number behind the percentage. This figure shows a baseline score of 26% of students in grades 3 through 8 scoring at proficient or above in school year 2022. On spring of 24, it shows that 31.6% of students in grades 3 through 8 scored proficient or above. This is a 2.9 percentage point increase from the school year 2023. Despite these gains, we are below our current annual target of 41.2%, or the proficiency is actually 9.6% percentage points difference. If we go to the next slide, we're looking at the progress towards the interim goals. And you see both goals 2.1 and 2.2 reflected. If you start on the left side, we have interim goal 2.1, the percentage of students in grades 3 through 5 with a projected Georgia Milestones achievement level of proficient or above in mathematics. Then the district's universal screening assessment, and we said it would increase from 30.2% in May of 2024 to 33.2% in May of 2025. Looking at the orange line, which represents our actual level of performance, we can see that approximately 32.6% of students in grades 3 through 5 are projected to score proficient or higher in math on our universal screener. This is a 1.3 percentage point gain for the fall of 2023. From the fall. Now let's move our attention to the right side of the slide. Here we have interim goal 2.2. The percentage of students in grades 6 through 8, which again you have similarly in the 3 through 5, that are projected to be proficient. And the goal was to move from 23.6 in May of 24 to 26.6 in May of 25. If you look at the orange line, which is the actual, we can see that 25.7% of students in grades 6 through 8 are projected to score proficient or higher in math. This is a 1.1 percentage gain from the fall of 2023. Both interim goals, 2.1 and 2.2, are to be determined. So if we look at slide 5, slides 5 and 6 are where I believe the meat of the conversation really exists. And you charging me or hiring me as superintendent, the charge is you've set a target, you've set some targets, and you will continue to set targets. And you've asked me to come in and identify how do we move student achievement as a district. And so it's the first thing you do, I believe, you find out what's really working and you find out what's maybe not working as well. And what you see before you are, in effect, our subgroups, or 3 of our subgroups that are represented. And so if you focus on the 3 through 5, which is this first graph, you'll see what actually needs to be done. So if you look at the orangish colored, it shows the number of black students, our black student subgroup. I'm sorry, rust is probably a more accurate. Orangish red is probably a more accurate. And then the actual orange one that's beside it shows our non or our white student group. And there's a sizable 60%, as in sizable, percentage point increase between how black students in Atlanta Public Schools have performed versus our white students on the 3 through 5 assessment. If you look to the right, if you keep going down the line, you can see represented economically disadvantaged students, and you can see the significant gaps that exist, a 49% percentage point gap when you look at proficiency rates. And then if you look at the third group of graphs, you see the students with disabilities, and the same story persists, 26% proficiency gap that exists. And so if we focus as a district on shrinking the gap, and we'll talk about this in some of the administrative actions, we can actually move proficiency for the district. The reality is more than 70% of our students are black in Atlanta Public Schools. And we also know that we have a significant proportion that are economically disadvantaged, as well that are students with disabilities. And so we have an opportunity, if you lean in, and you really just lean into where the opportunity is for Atlanta Public Schools in regards to moving student achievement. We have to lean into these areas to really make sure that we're getting it right. If you look at slide 6, which is the next slide, it in effect tells the exact same story, right? And you see the significant gaps that, again, persist in our black student performance versus white, a 67% percentage proficiency gap that exists, and then the same story in effect for economically disadvantaged students, and the same story, a 30 percentage point proficiency gap, and then a 21% proficiency gap in our students with exceptionalities. And so, in effect, we know that this is the area to lean into. You can see this in even more granular ways. You look in the appendix, which is not referenced. You can see grade and cluster level performance as well. So next, I'll just kind of take you to administrative actions and kind of taking this data in, and then we can have discussion, and I'm sure some folks will get called on that are sitting out there to come up and speak, but we look forward to that as well as we have this discussion. If you look at the next slide, we'll kind of tell you what we're looking to do. In order to accelerate the outcomes in math, we have to, really normalize the identification of student data by subgroups to monitor progress and to provide targeted support. And so We just need to have the conversation really plainly about how our subgroups are performing, but then also what strategies are going to be implemented, and to ensure that that's systemic throughout the district as we look at really ultimately student performance. And here's the news about subgroup performance is that what I've observed again is I think exactly 60 instructional days is that this variability in performance is pervasive throughout Atlanta Public Schools. So it's not a north or south or east or west. These subgroups, and again, I would say that also this is fairly pervasive in most urban school districts. But we should be the district. We should not be the district that's accepting this. We should be the district that's solving and attacking this issue as an opportunity. The second bullet is to continue weekly grade level data meetings designed in alignment with continuous improvement models to inform instructional decisions and practices. So, as we look at the instruction that's being delivered, really leaning in through the data and having direct conversation about how students are performing and how we're moving students. Thirdly is to develop a systemic approach to addressing student academic gaps and then aligning our resources accordingly. And so, it takes a targeted approach, and we should lean into a very targeted approach. And then providing professional development for coaches and teachers as they look at creating lesson plans and instructions that's aligned to grade level standards. And so this in effect concludes the SOFG conversation, comments, information update for today. And so I'll turn to the board for questions. How was it stated? For direction, guidance.
We only ask. We don't tell. All right.
All the above.
Are there questions? Okay. Whoa, oh, look at me asking a rhetorical. You too? Okay. Everyone down here? Yep. Got it. The whole crew. Katie, start with you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And I'll use this opportunity, as I always do with these reports, that I see, and this is what the board owns too, is the importance of narrowing this goal and, calling out the subgroup. Thank you so much. And slide, I guess it was 5 and 6 are so helpful and just show everybody clearly where we are right now, which, like you said, in order to solve an attack, you have to understand that. To get more into this report around numeracy, like middle school, looking at between like 6th and 7th grade, just a little more, you talked about, areas that you all are focused on, and the administrative next step. Can we talk a little more about middle school, let's say 7th grade, which is a place we've seen kids start to fall back a little bit? Any strategies that could be shared with us right now based on the data that we've collected so far and the approach and steps we're taking?
Yeah, I don't think, when I look at 7th grade, it in effect mirrors it mirrors all the grades. Like, there's not a big variance between 7th grade and 6th and 8th. So let me speak a little more globally about what I've seen in middle grades, and then probably speak more specifically to APS. Oftentimes in the middle schools, what you see, and I won't talk about Atlanta, I'm gonna talk about my experiences, we have seen struggle in the middle school. So there's a lot of focus and energy in elementary grade bands around teaching children to read and making sure they're getting foundational skills. And then there's a lot of energy and focus on the back end around, whether it be workforce or career development and graduation, all the things that are necessary. And so a lot of times there's not as targeted a focus on, the quality of instruction and making sure that that's also connected with exposure to career and access and all those things. And so really, not to be overly generic with the conversation, but we've got to just lean into really quality teaching. The biggest opportunity that I think exists really throughout is making sure that our curriculum guides are aligned to the state standards. So the resources that we're providing as a curricular, not the material necessarily, because that's a separate that needs to be aligned as well, but the actual guides, like what we're delivering to teachers. There's an opportunity to make sure there's tight alignment between that or as tight alignment as we can ensure between that and what's going to be assessed. And right now, one of the gaps that I see at the district level is the ability to gather or have, so we've got the MAP assessment, which addresses growth and gives a level of predictability, but you don't necessarily get the standard level information. And so I think we've got some opportunity at the standard level to understand how our students are performing and how they're going to do in as intentional way as we can when we look at performance on state assessment. So we've got to ensure that our curriculum guides are aligned. We've got to ensure that our assessment, the way we give assessments and what we give as assessments are actually aligned, but then that we leverage that data at a system level to lean in. That's a gap right now. Like it's genuinely what I observe as a gap right now is an opportunity for us to really make sure that we're providing tiered support to schools based on where they are. And I think it's pervasive for middle school, but that's true for elementary and secondary as well. And then lastly, really supporting teachers in how they deliver that instruction. And then you're back into that, what instructional material you have. But I think what I see is not necessarily when I look at the grade band distribution, I don't see as targeted as, oh my gosh, there's a 7th grade issue, or there's a 3rd grade issue, or there's a 5th grade. There's more of a broad issue around opportunity. I don't want to call it issue, a broad opportunity around making sure that the materials we provide teachers are tight, that what we that the ways in which we assess it's tight, and that we're actually leveraging that data to get better. Been a lot of conversation about assessment the last couple of weeks. We're going to do an assessment. We're going to have an assessment task force. It's going to have an internal vertical and an external vertical. At some point last year, I guess it was 2021, 2022, there was a benchmark. The benchmark became a common unit assessment maybe in 21, 22, still kind of used like a benchmark in some pockets. It's an optional thing. We've got to, it's either you're in or you're out on using a benchmark, and if we use it, right, like what are we doing? So those are all conversations we'll have in the spring. Those are all conversations that we've got to have in tandem with our teaching and learning team, as well as we want to get some parent voice around this as well. But overarching, we've got to do that across grade bands. So I don't see as a 7th grade issue. I see a math opportunity. And frankly, that opportunity is not just math. That opportunity is English. That opportunity is science and social studies. It's just kind of some of those foundation components that make strong teaching and learning operations. We've got pieces of it around. We've got to put those pieces either back together and add some new stuff, or we've got some work to do. And Dr. Butler, feel free, or anybody, I don't want to call Dr. Butler out as you're looking down, but anybody can feel free. It's in Teach Learn Time, and you can feel free, Mr. Usher, to speak to. I think there's some opportunity to continue the reset of what's happening from an academic standpoint, and there'll be and already is a good bit of lean in there.
Thank you for all of that. I don't mean to call it 7th grade, but just looking at middle school, and then again, this goal is 3 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to really, hone in on who is struggling the most. And I hear from you, the deep dive, look into all the assessments so you really understand even more close up, real time, what is going on. So that's extremely helpful for us. And then, on slide 6, just looking at, let's see, 40% of not socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and this is 6 through 8, and then 10% of economically disadvantaged students. Calling that out in terms of the proficiency gap, or proficiency in both of those areas, like that says there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of opportunity, like you're saying. And then, understanding we need to set these targets. So we have work to do as a board around this goal. So thank you for doing all the deep digging and diving and looking at strategies right now that help set us up to really narrow this goal, and then, of course, aligning that with our budget.
And one point for clarification, I know the public may be taking this in, not knowing folks just in general, that a lot of our subgroups, a student is multiple, right? So a student is economic disadvantage. They may be, exceptional education, and they may be black, right? So you check all three. So just a point of clarification.
Board Member Baldwin?
Yes, thank you. So I'm looking at slide 9, and first I'm going to say that direction was for us, Dr. Johnson, not for you. You are supposed to be all those things. We are not.
Well, I'm being facetious, but I'm just, yeah.
So as I look at slide 9, one thing that is happy to see, just in looking at trends, is that it looks like learners are shifting across the continuum, right? So we've got less people in the beginning, and it's shifting. And so what I want to know, stories from the field and places where we have seen positive movement, where we have seen growth, what do you attribute that to? Are there any positive stories, anecdotes that you can share in terms of things that did move folks in the space? And congratulations for the movement. I mean, any movement is good movement, so I am happy about that.
Appreciate that. Everyone needs a partner, right? So some of the effective practices that we've seen across the district deals with the identification and really understanding who's in the classroom, right? So that speaks to a school's ability to identify students across multiple subgroups, to identify who they are, then to create plans aligned to the needs of those individual students. And so this past principals meeting, we brought several of those practices back online, where we brought the principals along with one additional person from their team. In this case, we focused on special education, so most principals brought their special education lead teacher or an assistant principal who's responsible for managing and overseeing the work of special education. And we provided them with district data across all student groups, in this case specifically special education. We then gave them some tools around how do you identify the kids in the classroom so that you know who they are no matter what school you're in. And in this case, we reintroduced and refamiliarized principals with specially designed instruction so that once you've identified the students, you then know how to inform, teach best practices for that specific group of kids. And so we focused the day on special education, but by and large, the structure and the process is the same. It's really understanding who's in the room. So that's the practice, number one. How do you know who's sitting in the class and where they are in terms of their readiness level? After you know that information, it is then designing the appropriate instruction to meet the students where they are, which is a best practice. And it is something that we've seen work past, and it's something that we're trying to normalize across all of the schools in the district.
Thank you. I don't know if Dr. Love wanted to speak to, just specifically to that principal meeting, but in terms of teaching and learning, some of the best practices that we've seen work has been unit internalization. So as you know, last year was our first year with these math standards. This upcoming spring will be our second year. So the process that teachers went through along with the coaches was a unit internalization protocol. If you can think back to Understanding by Design, where you're really just looking at the unit before you teach the unit, really unpacking those standards, looking at what the student's experience will be like, and really crafting lessons specifically designed in alignment to the standards so that the students have a rich experience in the classroom and providing a teacher with that type of support. Our current design creates a space where the academic coaches are to get the training first. We have monthly opportunities where teachers are able to come out and get that support from the district specialist. And then also in our school district, in our in-person support, that's provided through PLCs and such. And so that's something that we've seen that's successful because it gives teachers the opportunity to really build their content knowledge and kind of practice in a safe space, before they deliver that content to students. And that's really important, particularly for elementary teachers who sometimes have the load of multiple content areas. And then specifically when you think about the fact that these are new standards and the design is to teach it in chunks. So that way they're learning the standards as they go and selecting the resources that best fit the standards that's being taught for that unit.
Wow, thank you. So my other question would just be, is there an opportunity? I'm gonna figure out how do I ask it in a way that it falls in how I can ask it. What are we doing to, if anything, to address the needs of our students where there is that overlap, where there is that intersectionality between all of those subgroups that we've identified? And is there an opportunity if we're not? I don't know exactly what the population is, but it seems that if you are a student that is Black or brown and struggling with income and you have disabilities, that it's like a perfect storm.
Yep.
That's hitting you, that's fighting against you. And is there something that we can do to be proactive, or is it like how do we address that situation?
Yeah, and so that's part of the work of identifying who's in the classroom, who's sitting in front of you, because kids can be doubly identified or identified multiply in multiple ways across all those subgroups. And this is where we bring in Dr. Love's team, but also Chelsea's team from an MTSS perspective, because kids can identify as needing some support services in a tiered fashion. That beyond the classroom, we need support from Chelsea's team. And then certainly from a special education perspective, we would bring in the team from our special education to coordinate with the principal, the instructional coach in the grade level chairperson, or the department chair to design the instruction to ensure that, again, we know what those exceptionalities are. And when they are doing the lesson internalization, teachers are talking specifically about practices that meet the need of students who may be identified in multiple ways. And then I'll let Dr. Love speak more to that.
Good afternoon. One opportunity that we took at our board meeting, thank you, at our principals meeting just last month was, as Tommy or Chief Usher focused on, was looking specifically at who's in the classroom, but also the roles or sphere of support for those students who have exceptionalities and understanding their roles and responsibilities. From there, we took the data globally, some of which was presented today, looked globally at our district and had led the school leaders through a protocol of supports, utilizing the Atlas, an adapted Atlas data protocol, and then having them refer back to their own school data. So a continuous drilling down of supports for those students and also leading to those leadership actions. To Chief Usher's point, we also took the opportunity to look at specifically designed instruction. Sometimes that work had sat with some of our ATSI schools, but we utilized this opportunity of principals meeting to globally teach and share what specifically designed instruction was for our school leaders. And from there, our inclusive practice specialists have now engaged in training specific schools and school leaders in a tiered fashion on understanding how that work looks in their classes, so that while the question was centered on our students who meet multiple categories, what we had to lean into was identifying those specific students and their needs and addressing those in a specifically designed way.
I'm out of questions, so I'll pause until it can come back to me.
Board Member Dr. Zeff.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for being so plain spoken in this conversation. I think the slides especially showing the slides 5 and 6, the gaps between our Black kids and our white kids. What's heartbreaking is the longer our Black kids stay with us, the larger that gap gets. And, going from 60% to 67%. And so that is, we obviously are moving with a sense of urgency, and I appreciate that. I want to tie this back to the conversation we had just a half hour ago with Ms. Montgomery. If 35% of our kids are chronically absent, you know, and we know that math is linear in the sense that it took the biggest hit during COVID because the concepts build on each other, and so you miss time on task, and you get behind, and the train starts to leave you behind, and and it would explain why the gaps get larger over time. As I want to take Board Member Baldwin's guidance and not provide direction, but I'm just going to leave some breadcrumbs out there that. Now they don't pay me for that, you talk about, we have this crushing deficit on attendance, and then we see math, which is a cumulative topic. We see this is where the bill comes due. How do we think about Dr. Johnson and team as we're thinking through how we're going to get right on this issue, how we're going to bridge this gap? How can we tie these issues together? Because all the world-class instruction in the world only goes you so far if the kid's not in the room with you at the time.
So recently, if I could, the student support team engaged in a cross-functional exploration on attendance district-wide, where several functional teams were present, including teaching and leading, academics, special education or exceptional education, and multiple other discipline was present as well. So to your point around like how do we address that, we have now engaged in that conversation. Again, a pickup from last year, I believe, but then also committing to do a root cause analysis so that we can be very intentional about solving that problem and how we address it versus trying to just throw things at the board. So now we're in that space and we have started to engage in that conversation.
And I would just add, probably connected to that is a discipline piece, right? So some of it we're doing it to ourselves by the amount of time in which we're sending children home. So yeah, I'll stop.
Board Member Brooks.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. I think as an educator and a black man, when you look at data, especially specifically subgroup data, and it's always pointing to children who look like you, look like your children, as being the places where we are doing the least well. It's always a gut punch. I had a couple questions. Just on the data side, I'm curious, because as I understand it, with the charter system, the intention is, for us to grant these charters to allow folks to come in and open schools and offer some things, and when they're doing some things well, for us to take some of those things and replicate them. But when we're looking at our data, it seems like we have a separation between our traditional schools and our charter schools and not seeing all of the data in one place. And I think specifically as we're going into the next year where we're having deeper, bigger conversations about right-sizing our district, I think consistently having our eye on charter data, traditional data, like everyone's data at the same time would be really, really helpful. Because I'm curious as to what are the outcomes looking like? Because when we did get to compare attendance data, we saw big differences, and then we can ask questions like, what's working there? When it comes to some of our other data, specifically around our ED students or students with SWD students, I'm curious as, what are outcomes on that side of the street looking like, and what are outcomes on this side of the street looking like, and is there anything we can glean from that as well? I don't know, you want to, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that one. So one of the things I remind is in Soft G, we try not to call out individual schools unless it's a glow. But I will say, you all know, which makes it public record, but it is public record because it's on APS Insights. We did the comparison of academic performance, and I think maybe a month ago it was in a board update where we just kind of looked, and what you see when you look at it is that Joe Austin, I want a real data person to come up here instead of y'all hearing from me. Joe would be growling at your second.
Somebody gets paid for that.
Joe, why don't you can give your summary of of kind of performance traditional charter partner, be great.
Certainly, we do have some charter schools that have done extraordinarily well, both, within the district and a state comparison. But when we look at charter partners holistically, in most of the metrics, subject areas, and tested areas, they are below compared to the traditional school when we look at that data. Now, of course, there are exceptions because each school is unique with their own governing board that, of course, is authorized by the APS Board of Education. And of course, last year, we did have the identified list, and there were a significant number of charter schools on that list as well. That again, charter schools are individual. They are part of the district, but each of them has their own governing body. But the answer to your question, traditional schools overall, consistently in most of the measures and grade levels, have outperformed partner and charter schools.
Yeah. No, I mean, should that be true? And I'm going to take you at your word that it is true. I think that's a good thing to have laid out for us as we move forward and continue to have conversations as well, as opposed to kind of having you're learning up on it later on, as opposed to continually seeing it. Because again, I think there are going to be areas where there's opportunity to learn and there's opportunity to replicate, and we won't know otherwise if we're not seeing both. I also heard you, Dr. Johnson, say students with exceptionalities or something to that effect. I was wondering, has our district officially made a change in language around special education, or you're just using that beautiful language I enjoy? I was just curious.
Well, I think we're working towards it. I think it's probably vacillated between the three. I've heard special ed, we shortened it SPED, even I came from Tennessee, and we are working towards that.
Okay.
I think it's Dr. Love. No, you don't have to get a cup. Dr. Love is working. We're working towards that. But just as with all things, it's going to take a little bit of time. And I will be honest, some people are still going to say special education, because in some places, in many spaces, that's the identified language that's used. But I think you'll hear us use both as much as we can, and in these settings, and when we're talking, we'll talk about exceptional education. But I know when you go behind closed doors, there are going to be folks that are saying special education, because it's so habitual. My certification says special education.
Yeah, so does mine, but it's a little archaic at this point. But no, I appreciate you using that language, even if it's just in the language that we use. It makes a difference to families and to students, so I appreciate that. Also, I did have one last question around, I hear us talking about attendance often, and I teach in a school where we struggle with attendance issues. And a lot of our attendance issues are not necessarily kids not showing up to school, it's kids not showing up to every class, right? And so I have a lot of curiosity around what are our intentionalities as a district around student engagement, rigor, and expectation. Not getting into the telling folks what to do piece, but those are areas I have not heard yet. Because what I know is, I happen to be that teacher where the kids are skipping other people's classes to be in my class. I'll be the fun teacher, let's call it that, right? But what I know is that even those students who are showing up in my classroom when it's not their time to be there, they're engaged in what I'm doing in the classroom. And I find that a lot of the reasons that our students are exhibiting escapism in our schools is that they don't feel engaged in what is happening in the classroom. And so it's like, okay, you got me here, but what am I here for? And so I'm wondering, what are we doing to help better prepare and equip our teachers to be more engaging? If you want kids to be interesting, you need interesting educators. And not a lot of educators know their content, don't necessarily know how to get a razzle dazzle, and they need their support. So I digress. Just curious as to what we're doing to help support that.
So, Board Member Brooks, it's so interesting that you asked the question. We literally just had a meeting this afternoon with our secondary coordinators, specifically in the area of mathematics, to look at that very thing. How are we engaging students at the secondary level in terms of not just the curricular resources, but what are teachers using to create excitement and energy around the lessons? And so we're doing sort of an audit, not just in the K-5 space, but the secondary space as well, to figure out how do we see across the entire organization what's working and what's not working, and then identifying how then do we sort of scale and normalize some specific practices and strategies that we can share across the board.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason where I was speaking about the unit internalization and the support with lesson planning with the coaches and teachers in the earlier response, because we have to get Tier 1 right? So we can have interventions and deal with the academic gaps and do the targeted intervention, but if we're not getting it the first path, whether because it's not appropriately aligned to standards, it's not being delivered in an engaging way, or it's delivered in a way that's a sit and get, and so the students do not have the agency or the appropriate cognitive load, that's where we're really looking to create a more systematized strategy around getting Tier 1 instruction right. So that could look a variety of ways. So some of the things that the team is working on in those monthly presentations, aside from the standards and what's in the district curriculum, but also what's, say, a strategy of the month that you can work on. So like right now, we're looking at student discourse. So making sure that one of the things I've heard was the one doing the talking is doing the learning. So how do we increase student voice in the room? So student to student discourse. So last year, a focus was just on teachers writing really good questions so that students are using their voices in responding to questions in academic language. This year, one of the focuses is on student to student discourse. So now we want you to be able to have your peers, have conversations with your peers. How do we teach you how to respectfully disagree? How do we teach you how to dig in to the learning in a way that's really on task and aligned to the standards? So that's what we're working on as a team, is getting Tier 1 right.
And in addition to the Tier 1 piece, we're also working with Ms. Montgomery's team on the operational side, so that when Tommy doesn't show up to class to your 5th period, how do we quickly respond to that and identify where Tommy is in the building, and how do we record it in Infinite Campus so that we're tracking students throughout the day, every day? So we're trying to attack the Tier 1 instructional side, but then also we want to make sure that everyone in the building owns a student and can find Tommy if he's not in his 5th period Lang and Lit class.
Board Member Briscoe Brown.
Yes, I'm passing on a question here from a community member that I don't know the answer to, so I hope you can help me. I note that we can go back to the slide we were on. No. I'd much rather look at the chart. It's much more attractive, also much more meaningful. In every case, in every cluster, across virtually every grade, the spring results are not as good as the fall results. So we see a dip in the spring and then it comes back up in the fall. And the community member wants to know whether there is a systemic reason for that, whether that's a computational issue, whether it's apples to oranges. It just seems to be so consistent across clusters and across grades, and even mostly across subgroups. Is there a reason why that happens in the spring? Sorry if I stumped you. It stumped me too.
Okay. So when we look at the different map windows, okay, we're working with a nationally normed referenced assessment. So when we look at a particular window, it's being correlated with where a student is projected to be at that that particular time based on national norms. So fall is a different look than winter and in spring, because they're projecting. It's a projection of proficiency, a prediction of proficiency at that particular window with that normative group. And so fall and spring, those are different time periods. Those are different snapshots. But when you think of fall and you think of spring, in the spring, MAP is given in March. All right, there's still about a month of learning left before the milestones, but a good part of the year has been taught. In the fall, it follows the summer, and it's really a projection almost of readiness of where you are. So they're looking at the start of the year and where are they projected based on national norms. So it's really a projection of achievement. It's not achievement itself. It's a projection of achievement based on that normative study. So we have to use caution when we try to compare. So comparing fall to fall, that we can do. That makes sense. Comparing spring to fall, that isn't comparable. Okay, fall to spring within that academic year is comparable. Okay, does that help?
Yeah, it does, actually. Thank you very much.
Board Member Johnson.
I think we've had a very rich conversation. I'm good.
Well, I do have a question. Well, I do. So here it is. I'm a parent, and my daughter had the opportunity to learn timetables on Zoom in division, which was real interesting during the pandemic. And that new math is new, because that's not what I was taught. But I do want to say that was an area she struggled in until she was able to do face-to-face. Going into, at that time it was second grade, going into third grade, well, on Zoom, and then fourth grade in person. Fifth grade, we're doing a little bit of algebra introduction, and that's where a little bit of struggle was. I will say once she got to sixth grade, now in seventh grade, I can say that I see the growth because she's able to do connections at her school to get the extra support for math. So my question is that connections, is that something that's offered at every middle school? Or is it just the flexibility and autonomy where certain principals can do connections? Or maybe they call it something different in the different schools, I don't know. But I've seen the growth in seventh grade math with her being able to do connections. Now, she can't take art, that's fine, but she has orchestra and everything else. But that was one of the areas that I found that worked really well for her. And I just want to know what is happening when we talk about middle school math. And I know we adjusted the standards and all that great stuff, but in middle school, what are we what kind of supports are there for math?
Yeah,
Sorry.
so every middle school offers connections, but then also every middle school offers a form of support so that as they are working with our students and it is identified that they need some form of support, that is offered at every single middle school. It's not cookie cutter, it doesn't all look the same across the organization, but the support is provided across all middle schools.
Thank you. And the other question is, and I guess this is one I like to always end with, what support do you need from the board to continue this work that you're doing as administration?
Well, I think if you go back to slide 5 and 6, I wish you could put them up. I think it's 5. Yeah, those two slides. So, when we talk about where we are, I think being able to speak to whether it's in the goals or in the goals, and I'm not I don't have the ability to direct, so I'm not telling y'all what to do. I'm not
Tell
telling
us
y'all
where we
what
need to
do,
lean in.
But I'm just saying. I'm working on my side of the fence over here. But since everybody's telling everybody, I'm just saying. But I do think there's a real opportunity here, potentially, right? Because this is where the biggest opportunity is for Atlanta Public Schools, right? And so I think at some level or layer, being willing to lean into this as where we're going to get the biggest. And look, you know, when we have these conversations, so I got just humor me for a minute here. When I got the opportunity to go to the business sector for a while and work in corporate America, it made even clearer what we're talking about here. Like this oftentimes is an emotional conversation when we talk about black students performing better. It is an economic imperative for Atlanta. It is a moral imperative if you are a part of Atlanta Public Schools. It's just we're in the business of education, so let's do our business better, right? If I am in effect your hired chief executive officer, and if I were dealing with things that weren't children and dealing and making a business case, which is what I'm making, I would be saying to you that when I look at you've hired me to improve the bottom line, and the biggest opportunity we have to improve the bottom line is right here before you. So I think the more the board speaks to it in that way, not with any, there's no, it's numbers. Behind these numbers are children, and what we see are significant gaps in how students are performing depending on which subgroup or which subgroups they are in. And so I think the way and the opportunity to lean into that is before us, and we have got to lean into it because you've charged us to improve student achievement. And so, like I told the team, we're not, let me say this, whether the board goes to the point of saying we're going to XYZ subgroup improvement, what we tactically have to do is to address subgroup, because ultimately we can't move the needle if we don't lean into improving subgroup performance. So the more we talk about it, the more comfortable we are talking about it and attacking it and having these conversations, I think the quicker the district will move, and the quicker the children of Atlanta Public Schools will see really strong gains, the gains that they deserve. Because I will say this, and they know this, I said, and I've been really, really honest, like Atlanta checks so many boxes, public schools check so many boxes from the standpoint of all the things that the research says you have to have a great urban school district, right? So the demographic of our teachers looks like the demographic of our students. The demographic of our leaders looks like the demographic of our students. We're resourced well. Like there are a bunch of, if people could make an argument about small schools, you got the small school equation on that. All these things are here, but the gaps look just like all the places that are saying they have the inverse. And so it's a budgetary conversation, like we lean in, but it's also just like, here's the truth, and all we want to do is tell the truth. And if we lean in, I believe we can do better for kids. We can do better for the kids of Atlanta Public Schools. So I think the more opportunity the board takes to speak with that level of granularity around what the work is ahead of us, the better off we're going to be. If we were dealing in plants, or not literally plants, but like plants that manufacturing plants, or we were dealing in my former life, transportation, any of these other things, they would look at this and they would say, oh my gosh, we've got to do something about Site X, and all hands would be on deck to go figure it out in Site X. Now, I will say this, resourced some of these, probably over-resourced some of these places to the point that the focus is like all over the place, because there's so many different things and opportunities coming at them. So there is some peel back of the onion that is still, I think, ahead of us. But again, I don't want to go in a soapbox, but the more the board speaks to this, and I'm going to be clear, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm talking about what we're going to do, and I think that there's a real opportunity to provide that cover for us.
Question?
Yes, that's the support from the board, but go ahead, Doctor. I call you Doctor.
I'll take Doc.
Go ahead, Dr. Brooks.
Get my Ken Zeff on. Yeah. Oh, man. We are going to be the most unserious board in the history of. Oh, come on now, let them know. Listen, in the past, I've seen board meetings where, there have been, this is previous boards, so there have been conversations around goals or conversations around specific policies. And specifically when the conversation comes up to including, targeting specific race, right? Saying black boys or black children, et cetera, has kind of become like a touch point, right? And this is just me kind of putting it out there, and I'm asking, as I'm looking at those three things up there, and I see a focus on special education and a focus on wraparound services, right? Those are the two, I guess, like antidotes to two of those areas, leaving race aside. Is the work slowed up? I don't want to say harmed, but is the work slowed up by not naming black children? Because often, everyone tiptoes around it by saying economically disadvantaged, tiptoes around it by talking about students with learning disabilities, knowing that it will catch, but not naming it specifically. So I'm asking us, does this board, does this administration have the courage to name it specifically and do it?
I want to be clear, the board sets the goals.
You saw I put us in it. I ain't just throwing it on you. We'll talk heavy, Katie.
We set the goals, we see the data,
We've
we
been
know.
ready.
We know the data always tells us a story. And I can go back to when I first got on the board, that's all I heard. That's all the conversation was about, was African American students. Now, we're at a point where with SOFG, where the data that's coming to us in a way that you cannot turn your head, it's right there in your face. And that's up to us what we're gonna do about this. And as a board, I don't have a problem having the conversation at all. It's just that we're gonna have to have the honest conversation and ensure that we are doing our part, but then also supporting the work that this administration needs to do to make, to ensure, and not to make, but to ensure, one, that all students are learning, but lift up the ones that are struggling. That's where the opportunity is. And I'm on board for it. That's why I'm here. And I know that's why a lot of people are here. And I want to see all our children succeed, but I also want to see this improve where we know that these kids are succeeding and we are setting them up for success.
I too look forward to the retreat that we're going to have where we review and reset our goals and our guardrails now that we have more information. Honestly, the story isn't much different, but we have more information, and I will continue to advocate for naming what it is.
And I'll chime in and say absolutely. And that's why I keep bringing up this goal is too broad. It doesn't mean we're not focused on all children, but you've got to focus in on who is struggling the most in order to make those gains. And I really applaud Dr. Johnson for talking about this at every engagement session that I've been to, being very honest with the community. And it's our job as a board to set those goals and working with him and his team focused on data, which that's the fact.
You even had a positive Ed Johnson email.
Hey, that's progress. But again, and other boards doing this work have shown that when you do that and you have approaches that are supporting those students, all kids benefit from that. And I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I know I talk about it when I'm talking about the work of the board around the goals and the huge gap between opportunity between our black students, our white students, our economically disadvantaged, and our exceptional learners. So we're here and we have the resources. We just got to align them with our needs, which requires us to identify them in our goals. So I'm excited about the work to come. Like Dr. Johnson has talked about going back out in the spring. We're talking about with leadership and the board development committee to tie all this together, and the budget, because the budget is the one that will really drive that with the focus around our needs. So it will take time to, it's always continuous improvement, but we're in a great spot right now. And I really appreciate everybody on this board talking about it like we are. And so, yeah. we're doing the work and there's more to go, and I can't wait for the retreat.
Thank you. And this concludes our work session items for today. Thank you, everyone, for your reports. Madam General Counsel, is there a reason for the board to retreat into executive session?
Yes, Madam Chair, the board needs to discuss personnel and legal matters.
All right. Is there a motion to enter in executive session to discuss student discipline, personnel, legal, and/or real estate matters?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, second by Board Member Baldwin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.